So a very warm welcome to everybody. Ed Dolphin is known to many of you. He retired as a school teacher in 2007 and moved to Sidmouth in 2013. He soon became very involved with the Sidmouth Arboretum, and last year he and John Ball started regular Friday tree walks, starting and finishing at the museum. These were highly successful, and we did in fact receive emails from visitors intending to come to Sidmouth who were planning their visit around the tree walk. And we really do hope that these can continue again next season if things get back to normal. Ed told me that as a teenager, he was for a short time employed as a bingo caller. But I understand that today he's concentrating on trees rather than calling out numbers. So thank you very much, Ed, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we could have a game of bingo later, perhaps, but still. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me to explore my favourite topic, and that's the wonderful trees of Sidmouth. I write tree-related articles in the Sidmouth Herald, and I had an idea to collate these articles for a book. And the COVID lockdown gave me the chance to do that and more. It allowed me to expand some of the stories and include extra trees. I'm very grateful to the SVA for backing this project and publishing the book. And I'm delighted that all the proceeds will go to support their work. I have to remind people I am not a tree expert, I'm a tree enthusiast. My book is not an academic textbook, although there is some technical information about the trees. But the book is mainly an invitation to just enjoy our treescape. So if a question does pop into your head, as Nigel said, type it in the chat box and we'll get to it at the end of the talk. We have some wonderful trees in our valley. In Blackmore Gardens, there's a lovely red oak. There are 2 Persian ironwoods in the knoll. There's a willow, a robinia and a horse chestnut, just 3 of the many trees in the byes. There's a fantastic canary date palm in Connaught Gardens. One of the ancient English oaks on Core Hill with some people up there on a very misty day. There's the large Monterey pine in Hunter's Moon. Please note the person standing underneath. Among many, you can see a coast redwood. There are various species of lime, and there's a turkey, a pin, and a red oak in the knoll that you can see in that picture. In the autumn, there's a glorious claret ash in Bickwell Valley. The churchyards have lots of yews. This one's in Salcombe Regis. There's the well-named handkerchief tree in the knoll. And one of my real favourites of the town, the wonderful cedar of Lebanon that hangs over the ford. So, why are we so blessed in Sidmouth? Well, it's a combination of 3 things. We live in a sheltered valley. There are few winter frosts, plenty of sunshine, and just the right amount of rain to make it a good place for so many different species to thrive. In Georgian, Victorian and Edwardian times, wealthy and fashionable people had marine villas built in Sidmouth, and they wanted gardens that would impress the neighbours. And these landowners had the benefit of the Veitch Nursery, just 13 miles down the road in Exeter. The Veitch family had a combination of horticultural and entrepreneurial skills. They employed many plant hunters who scoured the world for the latest novelties, but they also had the skill to propagate these new finds when they arrived back in England. Sidmouth is part of the first ever Civic Arboretum. 10 years ago, it was recognised that the treescape was a valuable asset, but it needed protecting and promoting. So the Chamber of Trade and the Town Council came together with a unique concept, a Civic Arboretum. Sidmouth doesn't have an arboretum. Sidmouth is an arboretum where every tree is appreciated. A community group was formed to carry the project forward. The first step was to begin cataloguing significant trees. Currently, we have more than 500 in our online catalogue. They are spread across the valley, but most of the recorded ones are in Sidmouth itself. There are trees everywhere, but there are some particular collections worth noting. Obviously, there are the ones in the byes. There are the ones in Blackmore Gardens and the churchyard. The cemetery and the Nature Reserve that the SVA now own have some lovely trees. And there is Knoll. There are others which are not accessible to the general public. There are some incredible trees in Powys, and Sidhome has a lovely collection, but it's out of bounds currently, hopefully only as a temporary thing though. With the Veitch family connection, our treescape is very international. If you take the Knoll collection, currently there are more than 70 species of tree and large shrub in the Knoll, but only 22 are native or naturalised. If you stand on the upper lawns of the garden, you can see all sorts of things. There's a ginkgo from China and the handkerchief tree from China. From Mexico, we have a liquid amber with its deep red autumn colour. California gives us giant redwoods and Monterey pines. There are large banks of Portuguese laurel. Black walnut can be found across large areas of the USA. We can thank the Romans for the mulberry that's in there. As I said before, there are 2 Persian ironwoods in the garden. And this is an Indian bean tree, but it's not from India, it's from South Carolina. And the pods do not contain beans, but small wind-dispersed seeds. Further down the garden is a monkey puzzle from Chile. Hiding behind the yew in this picture is a Canadian red oak. And the yew itself is Irish. It's an Irish yew. There is actually only one native tree that you can see there, and not very well then. You can just see the top of an English oak. Of course, you have to remember that it's only an English oak to us. It is a common or European oak to others because it is native across most of Northern Europe. There are so many trees I could have included in the book, but space was limited. This talk allows me to expand on some of the stories. I will start with the Arboretum's signature tree for the valley, the Monterey pine. The Monterey pine is actually endangered. In its native range, it's restricted to 4 small patches of foggy hillside on the California coast. Its existence became known to European scientists in the early 19th century. The Monterey pine was one of the Veitch nursery's success stories. Veitch's main plant collector for the Americas, William Lobb, sent a large consignment of seeds in 1852. Now, it's not easy to grow Monterey pines from seed, but the Veitch family worked their magic, and soon they had young trees to sell. We have many large trees around the town. This is a large one that's in the Knoll. This one is in Blackmore Gardens. This one is up on Sidford High Street. There's a lovely one in Lyme, tucked in between the houses, in Lyme-Bourne, sorry. There's the one that leans over the Royal Glen Hotel. There's a line of them up on Cliff Road, and there's another collection in Alma Lane. That one is in Powys. There are actually 3 large ones in Powys. That line is in the Knoll. Unfortunately, they won't be there soon. They're going to be cut down for the development. Every hotel seems to have one, and that one is in Woodlands. Now, these are all mainly second-generation trees planted about 100 years ago, but the very large tree in the Knoll might just be one of the original Veitch trees. It has a trunk girth of 6.5 metres, which makes it one of the largest in the country. The seed cones of Monterey pine are produced at the tips of branches, and they take 2 years to mature. But they stay on the tree for many years, waiting for the right conditions to open. Monterey pines are adapted to living with brush fires in California. They have incredibly thick bark. It scorches in a fire, but it protects the core of the tree from damage. The retained cones are another adaptation. The seeds are protected inside the large cones, which are sealed with a thick resin. The resin melts if there's a fire, and the cone opens after the fire has passed. The seeds are released to find a place in a newly cleared ground. Our trees don't experience brush fires, and the cones can stay on trees for many years before the resin breaks down to allow the cones to open. As I said, Monterey pines are endangered in Monterey, but they are not a rarity in other parts of the world. They are adapted to coastal air, and thanks in part to the veitch family, they are a common sight in seaside resorts along the south coast of England. More significantly, they grow very quickly. This tree in the knoll is actually less than 40 years old, but it's already nearly 20 metres tall and has a girth of nearly 3 metres. An oak tree would take nearly 150 years to be that size. They do slow down dramatically after 30 years, but they grow straight and they produce good quality timber. And because of that, they are the #1 exotic or non-native forest tree in the world, particularly in the southern hemisphere. There are about 1.5 million hectares of Monterey forest in New Zealand and about the same in Chile. Like so many things that grow quickly, Monterey pines are not that long-lived. They can't match an oak tree. Many of the large trees around Sidmouth are only 100 years old, as I said, but they are in decline. In particular, they drop large branches suddenly. This one is in Hunter's Moon. You wouldn't want that falling on your head. This was the latest of several branches to drop from the large tree in the knoll. It came down just before Christmas 2018 on not a particularly windy day. It's really important that if we want these large trees to feature on our skyline in years to come, we plant new ones now, which is what the Arboretum is doing here in the knoll and at Stowford. This one is in conjunction with the Town Council, who do so much to support us. Thank you to the Town Council. Our Monterey pines are among the largest trees in the valley, but the largest and tallest trees in the world are members of the redwood family. Giant redwoods are the most massive, and the coast redwoods are the tallest. Both are from California. There is a third member of the redwood family, the dawn redwood from China. Dawn redwoods are remarkable because, unlike most conifers, they're deciduous, but they are also considered as living fossils. Until the 1940s, it was believed that the dawn redwood was extinct, known to Western science only through fossils. The fossils are found right across the northern hemisphere, which shows the trees were very common 50 million years ago. In the 1940s, a series of Chinese botanists were exploring the remote valleys of Sichuan province, and they began finding large conifers that seemed unusual because they were deciduous. The trees created a lot of excitement among international tree scientists, and in 1948, they were finally pinned down as living examples of the fossil species. Other examples of the tree have been found in 2 remote valleys of China. They usually grow beside streams where the soil can be unstable, but the trees can stay upright because they develop large buttresses around the base of the trunk. They are attractive trees and have been planted widely as an ornamental. They grow incredibly quickly. The specimen in Knoll is one of the largest trees in the garden, but it cannot be more than 70 years old. There is one in Taranaki, New Zealand, that was measured at 28 metres, that's 92 feet in 2010, and when it was only 60 years old. Their timber is an attractive red, but it is not very good for building. And so, unlike the Montereys, there are not vast forestry plantations of this interesting tree. Another living fossil is the maidenhair tree, Ginkgo biloba, also from China, where they are revered and planted in sacred sites, such as the 1,000-year-old one in the Gu Guanyin Temple in the Zhongnan Mountains. The autumn display attracts crowds every year. Ginkgos get their common name of maidenhair tree because their 2-lobed biloba leaves look like those of the maidenhair fern. They are the only species still living from a family that has fossil descendants that go back 270 million years. Scientists consider them the most primitive trees alive today because their wind-borne pollen from the male trees has to release a swimming gamete to fertilize the ovules on the female trees. That's a hangover from the earliest plants that evolved in water. Female trees are quite rare in the UK. The fruits smell of vomit as they ripen, and so people will not plant them in their garden. There are several maidenhair trees around town, but one in particular is worthy of note, and not just because of its age. Ginkgo 1352 on the Arboretum database is in the garden of Knoll. It was planted on the top lawn in front of the west wing of the council offices in March 1970 to commemorate Sidmouth Urban District Council's purchase of the site. The young tree was provided by the Men of the Trees, an international environmental organisation started by a remarkable man named Richard St. Barb Baker. The organisation, now the International Tree Foundation, has been responsible for the planting of literally billions of trees across the world, many in East Africa. The tree in the knoll was planted by Council Chairman Arthur White, along with Leslie Bowden, the chairman of the local branch of the Men of the Trees. Another local member of the organisation, a Major Ryland, donated 2 cedar trees to the park in 1962. The ginkgo was in the way of Pegasus Life's plan for the site. They were going to build a 4-storey block of apartments right where it is. So as part of their PR campaign to counter strong opposition, the developers noted that the tree had local significance and offered to move it rather than have it felled. Moving a tree of this size is a mammoth operation, and Ruskins, a specialist company, was hired for the job. In the spring of 2018, a large trench was dug around the tree to expose a root ball, which was then wrapped in special sheeting that promotes the growth of new micro-roots. They're the ones that actually do the work of taking in water. The tree was left with an irrigation system in place while, sorry, I've lost myself. With an irrigation in place while new microbes developed. It was supposed to be moved in 2019, but the sale of the site was delayed and the tree is still sat waiting to be undercut and dragged to a new site further down the garden. When the developer finally paid for the site, EDC moved out, and despite warnings to the council and the developer about the water supply, the irrigation system was actually disconnected. The tree was suffering, but that was reported by anxious local residents, and a new system has been set up. Hopefully, the tree will be moved to its new site soon, when it will need a care programme for 10 years to ensure it survives this trauma. Ginkgo is a very interesting tree for reasons other than being a living fossil. There are many claims about health benefits from the seeds and the leaves, including that ginkgo tea helps fight dementia. There is little definitive science to back up these claims, but the leaves do contain chemicals that dilate blood vessels, and the improved blood flow could help improve memory function. Ginkgos are very good trees to plant in urban settings. They are tough, they're resistant to the weather and to pest damage. One of the few things to survive the Hiroshima bomb was a ginkgo. They absorb the pollutants of traffic fumes, but you do need to think carefully about where to plant them. They grow to a height of 12 meters in 20 years with an elegant pyramidal shape, but they then spread out and will become much too large for the average domestic garden. This one is in the grounds of Sidmouth. You might not be able to judge how big it is until you notice the man standing underneath it. The delay with the knoll development gave an extra year of life to the magnificent southern magnolia that's growing against the old building. Sadly, this tree didn't have a plaque, and so, despite calls for it to be saved, it will go when the building is demolished. Apart from being about 100 years old and one of the best specimens of the species in the country, this tree has local significance because it is a wonderful example of the variety called Exmouth. Magnolia grandiflora was first brought in from South Carolina in the 18th century. One of the early imports was planted in the Exmouth garden of Sir John Colleton. It turned out to be a superb tree with huge white flowers that had a delicate citrus smell, and they kept appearing from May right through to November. It was such a good example that cuttings were taken by a local nurseryman and sold at £5 per cutting. In modern spending power, that's about £4,000 per cutting. The original tree was cut down in 1794, unfortunately, but apparently it was by a mistake when a builder was extending the house, rather than as the planned act, as in the case of the knoll tree. I only discovered a few months ago that the hotel owners planted 2 magnolias. They also planted one in a far corner of the kitchen garden, near the old peach houses. That area was sold off as building plots in the 1930s, and the tree is still standing in the garden of one of the houses. The owner treasures the tree despite it being rather large for the small garden, and it will be allowed to live out its life. There are a few much smaller grandifloras around the town, and the Arboretum will be planting a new Exmouth as part of the Connaught Gardens Jurassic Garden plantation. Magnolias were one of the first trees to develop flowers, and they've been with us since the Cretaceous period. So let's hope the one in Connaught Gardens has the chance to grow to be as magnificent as the one the town has lost. Not quite as ancient as the ginkgo, fossil records show that close relatives of the monkey puzzle were the dominant trees around the world 70 million years ago. Mature specimens have a characteristic growth habit, a tall, straight trunk that's bare of branches until a good way off the ground, and then a canopy of broadly spreading branches high up like an umbrella. It's actually believed that this arrangement was a factor in the evolution of long-necked dinosaurs. The name used by the indigenous Mapuche people is pehuen. The tree's scientific name is Araucaria araucana, after the Arauco region of Chile, where they were first seen by Spanish explorers. Later plant hunters gave them the misnomer Chilean pine. They do come from Chile, but they are not pines. They have their own family, cousins scattered across the Antipodes and Pacific Island groups, such as the Wallonie pine and the Norfolk Island pine. This little one was planted in the knoll last year. It disappeared just before Christmas. Perhaps someone thought it was a Christmas tree. If they have planted it in their garden, we might spot it one day because when they grow, they have a very distinctive growth habit. The name monkey puzzle is supposed to have arisen as an after-dinner joke. Sir William Molesworth of Pencarrow in Cornwall paid 20 guineas for a large specimen from the Veitch nursery and was showing it proudly to his guests. When a guest leaned forward and was pricked by the leaves, he is supposed to have said, "It would be a puzzle for a monkey." The joke was soon passed around dinner tables across the southwest and beyond as fashionable society went about their rounds. Coincidentally, Pencarrow was where Veitch's celebrated plant hunters William and Thomas Lobb were born. They were sons of an estate carpenter. It was William Lobb who had sent back a large consignment of seeds to the Veitch nursery in 1842, and Sir William's tree was probably from one of those seeds. In the same way that Chilean pine was a misnomer, Araucarias would never have had the chance to puzzle a monkey. There are no monkeys in the region where they grow. Araucaria seeds are delicious and nutritious. They are supposed to have arrived in Britain in 1795, when Archibald Menzies, who was an amateur naturalist, was actually the ship surgeon on HMS Discovery that was exploring the Pacific. He was served some seeds at a meal with the Viceroy of Chile. Menzies pocketed some seeds and managed to grow them on board ship. And when he returned to England, he presented them to Kew Gardens. Araucarias are slow to establish, but as with most trees, you have to think about where you plant them. The ones in the triangle of the three-cornered plot were donated by Waitrose. They're beginning to grow quickly. The one in the Garden of Knoll was planted about the same time as the ginkgo. Sidmouth Urban District Council and the EDDC were very keen to plant trees around their new offices in the 70s. The Bicton Avenue was planted in 1844. The largest trees are up to 29 metres tall with a girth of 4 metres. The one in Temple Street may never have the chance to reach that size. I don't think it'll be allowed. One interesting collection of trees that did not have much space in the book is the group of conifers in the cemetery. This is partly because they are likely to be visited less often than the other trees, but also they're quite a tricky group to be sure about. The most obvious ones are the Scots pines that stand in a line running north to south across the middle of the site. These mark the western boundary of the original cemetery. Along with yew, Scots pine are our main native conifer. Juniper is a third, but much rarer as a full-grown tree. They are easy to distinguish from the Monterey pines. They tend to be much lighter in form and colour. The bark is much less craggy, and it's a sandy orange in the upper parts of the tree. The needles are quite short, and grouped in twos, whereas Monterey pines are much longer and come in threes. And the much smaller female cones of the Scots pine do not stay on the tree for years. In the newest part of the cemetery, there's an avenue of Italian cypress progressing up the hill. These are the columnar form of the tree that you see in pictures of Tuscany, but you do get wider forms across the Middle East, and they can be extremely old. The cypress of Abaku in Iran is estimated to be 4,500 years old. Back in the cemetery, there are Sawara cypresses. These are highly prized in Japan for their lemon-scented, rock-resistant timber, and it's used for special projects such as temples and palaces, and coffins. The scientific name translates as small cypress, which it clearly isn't, and like a pea, and that refers to the small cones, which are pea-shaped and pea-sized. There is a Japanese hiba. This is not a true cypress, but a close cousin. It has unusually fleshy leaves that make the twigs look rather like scaly snakes. It's appropriate that the tallest tree in the cemetery is a representative of the tallest trees of all, the coast redwood. Coast redwoods grow quickly, 30 to 60 centimetres, that's 12 to 24 inches in old money, a year in their first 100 years, and then they start slowing down. If they get the chance, they will grow to more than 100 metres tall. The tallest known tree is Hyperion, which stands in the Redwood National Park in California. I say known because there are stands of other very tall trees in the same valley that are yet to be measured. Some of them may be taller still. Hyperion, named after the Greek Titan, was 115 metres, that's 380 feet in 2006. We know the exact height of Hyperion because it was measured. Someone actually climbed to the top and dropped a tape all the way to the ground. Hyperion is still quite young, it's about 600 years old, and it is still actively growing. To give you some sense of scale, it stands more than 5 times the height of the tower of St. Giles and St. Nicholas Church. And it's 30 metres, 100 feet taller than General Sherman, which is the largest giant redwood. The 50-year-old cemetery redwood is 20 metres, that's 66 feet tall, has a girth of 3 metres or 10 feet. I talk about the approximate age of a tree, and I think the one question that we are asked most when leading a Friday guided tree walks from the museum is how old is a particular tree? Sometimes it's easy because there is a plaque or there is a record of when the tree was planted, but that is not often the case. You can count the growth rings on a tree, but that can only be done if the tree is cut down. Of course, you don't want to be chopping trees down to see how old they are. You can take a core sample. A special drill extracts a pencil-like sample across the rings, and you then count the bands. But this is a specialist job. There must be an easier way. You could compare different trees. You know one is a particular age, and so that one's bigger, it must be older. But when you're comparing different species of tree, it's even less reliable. Remember the Monterey pine and the oak tree mentioned earlier. One would be 40 years old, one would be 150 years old at the same size. Also, growth conditions can make a huge difference to how large a tree will grow. This is a Yamaki pine. That one is 395 years old because it's been kept as a bonsai and so its growth has been restricted. Many trees are cut down every year. So if you take the opportunity to count the rings on a very large sample and also measure how big those trees are, if you discount the trees growing in extreme conditions, you can work back and make a reasonable estimate of the link between the size of the tree, the girth of the tree and the age by measuring the trunk. There's a lot of data crunching that needs to go on, but there are tables and you can actually make a graph available that can be used to give a reasonable estimate of the age of the common trees just by measuring the girth. You usually take this measurement at about 1.3 metres above the ground. It's called at breast height, if you look in the technical literature. Note that trees tend to expand more quickly when they are young, but the rate of increase slows with age. This is where tree hugging can come in. If you don't carry a tape measure around with you, my arm span is about 1.7 meters. If I wrap my arms around an oak tree growing in good conditions, if I can touch my fingers on the other side, that tree is probably about 80 years old. If I can only reach halfway round, the tree is probably about 180 years old. And you get a similar result for beech, sweet chestnut, and black pine, because they tend to grow at about the same rate as an oak tree. Ash and horse chestnut of the same girth will be a bit older because they grow more slowly. And the plane would be younger because they increase their girth at a faster rate. But of course, you have to remember that's on average. I can't talk about the trees of Sidmouth without mentioning ash. The valley's hedgerows used to be grazed by thousands of large elms, but these were lost to Dutch elm disease in the 1970s, and their place was taken by ash trees expanding their presence. In the Arboretum's 2014 survey of the valley, we established there were about 40,000 ash trees in the valley, and most of those, about 32,000, are standard trees in the hedgerows. Many of these are now showing signs of ash dieback, a fungal disease that blocks the water transport system in the tree, and that causes leaf wilt, and then the death and dropping of large branches, and eventually the death of the tree. The worst case scenario is that most of our mature ash trees will be lost in the next 5 years. For example, there was a line of 9 ash trees in Long Park. They're actually being taken down at the moment. Fortunately, they are interspersed with oaks, and these will spread out to fill the gaps. So even with the trees down, there will still be trees standing there. This was Long Park this morning. I thought with the poor light, with the overcast sky and the frost on the grass, it made for a very dreary morning with the dead trees lying there. The loss of the ash trees will have a huge impact on the look of the valley, but an even bigger impact will be on biodiversity. A report from the Joint Nature Conservation Committee found that there are a large number of species and animals and plants that are supported by ash trees. Ash trees are prolific seed producers, however, and the wing keys can spread the seeds far and wide. So one hope is that the small number of trees that do have resistance and survive will pass this on through their seeds, and our great-grandchildren possibly will be able to enjoy these graceful giants in years to come. Having started with the Arboretum signature tree, I will end with the country's signature tree, the English oak. Although, as I said earlier, it isn't really an English tree at all. It is the European oak, ranging over most of Europe. A mature oak is its own biodiverse world. It will support over 300 other species, from the caterpillars of the purple hair streak feeding on the buds, to the mycorrhizal mycelia living in symbiosis with the roots. In ideal conditions, oaks can live for nearly 1,000 years. There are 3 stages in the life of an oak. It will spend 300 years of active growth. Then there will be 300 years of steady middle age. And then they can spend another 300 years in slow decline before finally dying and returning their nutrients back into the natural cycle. The oldest tree that I have found in the valley is on the edge of Gilchrist Field in the Buys. With a girth of nearly 6 meters, it's about 400 years old. It stands on the bank that is the boundary between Salcombe Regis and Sidmouth parishes. There are many other oaks on the bank, which runs alongside Byes Lane, but most of these are less than 200 years old. As is typical with the hedgerow trees in Devon, the Gilchrist oak is pollarded. That means it was cut off at head height with an axe. This was done for 2 reasons. It produced a regular crop of fresh timber, and it caused the crown to spread out and provide more shade for stock grazing in the field beneath. Unfortunately, this tends to cut short the life of the tree. Where the multiple branches spread out, you get a weakness at the top of the main trunk. The fanned out branches catch the wind, and you can get catastrophic failures. This happened in the knoll this summer. One of the old oaks that has stood since the Knoll estate was farmland just dropped its entire crown on a windy day, with several tons of timber crashing to the ground. The remaining trunk has been left standing as what foresters call a snag. It may regenerate, but it's much more likely that it will just fall apart slowly, providing a home to all sorts of life forms as it does. And then finally, something to think about. Growing trees is a long-term thing that extends beyond the human lifetime. Sometimes you get people like Capability Brown and his customers who think generations ahead and plant trees that they know they will not see mature. But most of us focus on our own time on the planet. People are worried that we will lose our oak trees because of climate change. But if you switch gear and think in geological time, oaks arrived in Devon about 7,000 years ago because of climate change, the post-glacial retreat of the ice sheet. Before that, the whole area was just tundra with no trees at all. And so the English oak's time with us is part of a longer process. And who can say what will be the quintessential English tree in 7,000 years' time? There's a lot of work going on to see which trees we should be planting now. Now, there is a lot more information about our local trees on the Civic Arboretum website, as I say. Thank you for listening. If you've already bought the book, The Trees of Sidmouth, I hope I've enhanced your experience. If you haven't bought it yet, I hope I've encouraged you to do so because there's a lot more in there that I haven't covered today. And Christmas is coming. You can buy it through the SVA website or from local bookshops. If you are an SVA member, and that is an excellent thing to be, I hope we all are, they have a special offer of free delivery to Sidmouth addresses while the museum is closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ed. I think I may have misheard you, but I think you said at the beginning of your talk that you weren't a tree expert.
No,
well, is that what you said? I mean, you could have fooled me and fooled about everybody that was listening. A huge amount of information, and brilliantly put across with fantastic photographs, which I guess most of those you took yourself. I would think, did you not?
Yes, I didn't manage the dinosaur picture myself, but I got that with kind permission of the artist in America. He's a fantastic artist who specialises in drawing dinosaurs.
Oh, great. Only one question came up that I saw. It was from Stella, who said, what are the boundaries of Sidmouth Arboretum? Does it extend outside Sidmouth itself? For instance, does it extend to Salcombe Regis?
It is the jurisdiction of Sidmouth Town Council, so it does include Salcombe Regis. In actual fact, some of our tree labels are on the trees in Salcombe Regis churchyard, and we've started doing guided walks around there in conjunction with the church's cream teas in the summer, except not this summer, of course. So yes, it goes right up to the Hare and Hounds, across to East Hill Strips. It's the jurisdiction of Sidmouth Town Council, the whole of the Sid Valley.
Thank you. Hopefully towards the end of next year, we might be able to get back to the Manor Pavilion. But in the meanwhile, these are the three talks that have been arranged. On January the 13th, I'm putting on a photo quiz of old Sidmouth photos. I've put there a photo quiz with a difference. You'll see what the difference is if you come to it. But it's meant to be light-hearted, and so it's not entirely serious, but hopefully there'll be, people do like to look at old photos of the town. On February the 10th, Roger Trent, who I see is with us in the audience, is giving a talk, Sidmouth's Coast, What's Going On? And on March the 10th, John Ball, who helped us with this presentation today, helped through the Science Festival, is giving us a talk on the Sid Valley Biodiversity Project. So please make a note of those dates, and we look forward to seeing and perhaps hearing from you then. for the moment, I want to call the meeting to a halt and to wish you all the best for the new year. Whatever the new year holds, I'm pretty confident it'll be better than this year. All the best. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.